Hey gang, I'm Joe Edelman and welcome to the Last Frame Live. If you're watching live, please leave me a note on the chat. Let me know who you are and where you're watching from. And hey, if you're watching the replay, no worries. Drop a comment below the video. That way I know you're here. Already, we got a lot of people here. Lynn's here from New York. Nicola's here from Italy. David in San Diego. I got Jay in Southern Colorado. Nick's down in Maryland. Joe in California. Calvin in Maine. Mike is up there in Montreal. And who else do we got? We got James up in Alaska. Pretty cool, huh? So let's dive right in. Fortunately, there's not a lot going on 2 weeks in a row in photography news, but there was one or two things that I did want to mention. So for those of you, Ashish from India, welcome. For those of you that are not fans of Photoshop, prefer Photoshop alternatives, you've probably heard me talk about this before. Hands down, my recommendation for, where's my button? There's my button. For a Photoshop alternative is absolutely going to be Luminar Neo. And Luminar Neo took a big step with their latest announcement, which I believe was like late last night, if I'm not mistaken. They're coming after Adobe with a lot of the generative tools. They've got Gen Erase to replace unwanted distractions in a photo. Scene Expand, Adobe calls it the generative expand. Scene Swap, you can swap out elements. Water Enhancer, especially for aquatic scenes, underwater scenes, that kind of stuff. A studio lighting scene that looks like it does some cool stuff. I have not tried it yet, okay? Neon Glow, I'm not gonna lie, that one, I love what Luminar is doing. I'm not a fan of that, and here's why. Because now we're going to see like an abundance of neon glow pictures, because unfortunately, a lot of photographers just are lazy and not creative. And I know I'm going to get hate for that, but keeping it real, right? Because unfortunately, it's kind of a very specific look and feel, and you can bet your life people are going to be like banging on that one. But looks like pretty cool stuff. Also, Luminar is in the process of kind of reworking their whole pricing model. So you get all of the extensions, think of extensions kind of like plugins and that, all the different tools kind of all in one. I'm not saying, hey, you should be switching. I don't make any money from them, but it's worth keeping an eye on this. And not because it's a race, right? But because it's different. Especially if you're one of those people that finds Adobe products, especially like Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, to be a little bit overwhelming. And it's okay if you do, right? No harm, no foul, no shame there, right? Luminar Neo has most of the same tools, except for like layers and things like that in Photoshop, the hardcore stuff. But all the Lightroom stuff, Luminar Neo has the same tools, but it's definitely a friendlier interface, easier to understand, excuse me. And if you're just getting into photography and really just getting into post-processing, Luminar Neo makes it a lot easier to be able to kind of, do some really nice stuff to your imagery without necessarily understanding all the fine details of how to do it. They have a whole preset set up that kind of gives you a jump start, right? But don't get lazy, right? Presets are cool, but use presets as idea generators, right? They kind of push you in the right direction, and then you're going to massage it a little bit more. Whatever you do, make it your own. All this AI stuff, all these presets, all this stuff, I think this stuff is amazing. I'm using it. I am all in on AI in lots of different ways. Even with my retouching right now, I'm using some AI tools that are just crushing it and saving me tons of time. And yes, I'll be talking about them in an upcoming episode. But, at the end of the day, right, you still got to give it your touch for a couple of reasons. One, I don't want the computer to do everything for me. I want the computer to help me, right? I take no pride in having the computer create something for me and say, oh, look what I did, because I didn't do it, right? So I'm not worried about the computer replacing me or any of that kind of stuff, but man, is it making my job easier, number one. And number two, it is really kind of helping me with idea generation. And that's actually part of where our DIY tip is going to be tonight. Not AI, not computers, but it's an idea generation conversation we're going to have. So that was a big piece of the news this week. And then also, you know, it's worth mentioning, I'll get hate for this. I know I'll get hate for this. MagMod. This came through my feed the other day that they now have like, you know, full-size monolight systems. They call it MagMod XL. So, you know, it's got a collapsible reflector and, you know, you can put larger gels and grids and all that kind of stuff. And I was like pretty doggone excited. I'm like, oh, now we're talking. This is awesome. Looks neat until you get to the price. So I'll get hate. You know, I find it appropriate that both Westcott and MagMod are, you know, Westcott's got an ad on the MagMod page here. Two companies that, unfortunately, they're just overpriced for what they're delivering. I'm a huge fan of MagMod. I have met Spencer, the founder/owner of MagMod. I have talked with him. They have given me a little bit of free product in the past. I've spent a ton of money on their product. MagMod's never been inexpensive, but they have been really, really good. This new setup they have, it's definitely innovative. This will be great for all the zombie photographers that like to take their Godox 8600s and their pro photos that they had to max out a credit card for and go out on location and overpower the sun. This will be awesome for them because it's going to be lighter and it's not as heavy, but it's every bit as expensive as those strobes that you're taking out to overpower the sun. So, you know, they're zombies. They'll go along. They'll buy this stuff. It's time that we hold these companies accountable, folks. I got to tell you straight up, you could DIY this. I promise you, within a month, I will DIY what MagMod's doing here, okay? Is it going to be as good? No, it's DIY. But for as much as any of you would use this product, myself included, I told you I was really excited. I would have even considered spending money until I saw how much money they're charging. And here's the thing. Spencer, if you see this, if somebody shows it to you, anybody from MagMod, I will gladly do a live stream and have you come on to justify the cost. But I'll tell you in advance what my response is to whatever justification you give for your cost. And I'm gonna play Walmart here. Okay? For any of you that don't understand this piece, do a little bit of research on how Walmart does business with our other companies. In fact, Google Walmart and Rubbermaid, and you'll learn a lot about this. But basically, Rubbermaid wanted to sell things in Walmart, and Walmart said, okay, here's your product line, we'll sell it, but we're only willing to pay this much for your products because we want to sell it at this price. And Rubbermaid laughed at them. Rubbermaid said, we can't make money that way. It's not possible for us to sell it to you at that price. Walmart laughed back. Walmart laughed back and said, if you want your products in Walmart stores, you go back and you figure out a way to sell us that product at that price. To this day, Rubbermaid credits Walmart with their survival and their profitability because they went back and they figured out how to make their products every bit as good, but less expensive, and in the process, even more profitable while selling things to the consumer for much less. Because you know darn well Walmart's making a profit too. Okay, so it's doable. MagMod, they've been around for a while, right? Great company. Ultimately, they have changed the game. But the prices that this stuff is selling at, absolutely ridiculous. For those prices, I'll carry a few extra pieces and maybe an extra pound or two if I'm going on location with that kind of gear. Plain and simple. It's time to start holding companies accountable. So DIY version coming, I promise. MagMod, if you want to talk, let's talk. And I'm not trying to get free stuff, guys. Like, straight up. So MagMod, if you're thinking that's my game, I have no game other than, hey, these prices, ridiculous. I will give you this piece of credit, though, MagMod. I'm really glad that you did not do a Kickstarter on these, because I'm not going to lie, that's another one of my pet peeves. We in this industry, as photographers, as consumers, we should not be supporting companies and paying companies to develop product and then paying them for their product a premium so that they profit even more. No, that's not how it works. Okay? So that's our news for the week, gang. All right. Let's go ahead and let's talk about our DIY thing right now. Some of you are going to be like, no, but this isn't like a hack. Actually, it is a hack. And I would argue this is potentially one of the best hacks that I've given you, and probably one of the most important hacks that I've given you. And this is another one where maybe it's going to feel like I'm kind of kicking a little bit. I am. So it's just keeping it real, right? But it's a creativity. It's a motivation hack that I'm giving you, right? I routinely, and I'll tell you what triggered this, full disclosure. I am doing a presentation this Friday in Virginia. In fact, I'll give you my education calendar in just a few minutes, but I'm doing a presentation this Friday down in Virginia for the Virginia Professional Photographers Association. That's the regional affiliate of PPA in Virginia. And I was just kind of going through all my notes and going through my slide decks and everything that I'm doing. This is literally a 8-hour workshop that I do on a Friday. And these are fun to do because this is like A to Z everything on creating my fashion portraits and marketing them, selling them, social media, all of it, right? So I have a lot of fun doing these. But there is a piece that I talk about in this presentation that has to do with where do the ideas come from? So you're all familiar with my photographs, and I do get that question frequently. Where do you get your ideas? So depending on my mood, I love to give like a deadpan answer that's just simply drugs. But I promise, I've never done drugs, all right? I'm just kidding with that answer. And that's what some people actually think, though, is like, my God, like, how far out there do you have to be to come up with that? And I'm not that far out there, and I'm actually not that creative. I have the same kind of struggles that a lot of you do. Add to that, I've been taking pictures for a really long time. So every time I pick up a camera, and I'm not asking for sympathy, I'm just saying it's a challenge. If you're not facing it yet, hopefully you'll live long enough and you'll shoot long enough that you will face this challenge. Every time I pick up a camera, there's a lot of been there, done that in my head. So if I don't want to do the same old thing and I really do want to do something different, it's a lot harder to come up with ideas that I've never done before, or in today's world of Instagram and Pinterest and all these social media platforms, an idea that I've never seen before, right? So the hack is building a habit. Yeah, okay, in other words, this takes a little bit of work, but it's building a habit to help you come up with ideas. All of you already have the primary tool that you need to do it with. So that's the good part. This hack literally will not cost you a dime at all, okay? The hack is your phone. That's your hack, okay? Use your phone, set up an album or two, maybe 3 or 4, depending on how you like to categorize things. But set up an album or so in your phone where you are going to save idea photos. And I'll come back to the photos in a second. And then in your phone, whether if you're an Apple person, use Apple Notes, or even on the iPhone, you could use Google Keep. If you're an Android person, Android has a note-taking app. Also, all that stuff. So set up a note or a series of notes, again, depending on how you like to organize, where if it's just something that pops into your head, type it in the note. If it's something that you see it and you're out and about, take a picture. If you're surfing the web and you see something, screen capture it, right? And you just collect these ideas. Now, here's the goal, right? When I do this, and I'm not exaggerating, I swear to you, I do this every day. I'm always on the lookout. Always on the lookout. Rarely a day goes by that I don't add something to one of my notes or to my photo album. So I'm not looking for, let me tell you what I'm not looking for as part of this habit. I am not, and by the way, there's a part 2 to this. It's really important, okay? So if you want to know the real magic to what I'm telling you, you got to hang in for a minute, okay? What I'm not looking for is, oh, that's cool, I want to do that. No, it's already been done. Why do I want to do it? Look, I don't care, even if you're new to photography. All right, look, if you're new to photography, I'll give you a little leeway. It can be fun if you see something to try and accomplish it, and it can be good for your own confidence. But promise me this. Don't go sharing it on social media like, oh my God, look how amazing I am. Because honestly, you're not that amazing. You stole somebody else's idea and you just tried to do the exact same thing. And you're all old enough to know what a Xerox is, right? Never as good as the original. So when you go through that process, especially if you're new to all of this, when you get to the point where you finally like, there, oh my God, I did it and it's cool. Stick with it. At that point, figure out how to put a little twist on it. Figure out how to make it your own. So what I'm looking for when I'm looking at pictures, I'm looking at a picture and it may be a part of the hairstyle, the way waves are set up in the hair, some kind of curls done, or it may be a color combination that I would have never thought of using on my own, right? It could be a texture, any number of possibilities. It could be a pose or a posture that I think is really interesting, and I never would have put that together with something. And so it goes in the photo album. Or if something pops into my head, I type it. Now, that's all well and good, but if you manage to build that part of habit, you get to a point then where you've got hundreds of notes and thousands of photos, which is exactly what I have on my phone. No exaggeration. So how do you take that habit and turn it into great ideas? You have to set aside a little bit of time. This is where the second half of the habit comes in. At a minimum, once a month. Full disclosure, I do it probably once a month for about a half an hour. When you're just starting out and you're trying to really turn this into a habit, I would encourage you, try to do it for maybe 20 minutes a week. And then get to the point where maybe you're doing it 30, 35 minutes every 2 weeks, right? And then, yeah, a year or two from now, maybe you're going to do it once a month. But here's what you're going to do. You are going to open up that photo album and you're just going to scroll through your photos. And you'll be amazed how often it's kind of like you're seeing them for the first time and ideas will start to pop. And again, I'm not looking for a picture to copy. I'm looking for a picture to steal from. And I'm going to put things together with other ideas that I have. And I'm going to create my own piece. So I'm looking at elements. Same with the ideas that I write down. Now, there's a couple important pieces here. Guaranteed, if you start this, and if you trust me, you try this out, you'll be going through your pictures, and you'll come across a picture, and your thought's going to be, why the hell did I save this? Like, what is that? Don't delete it. Don't stress that you're looking at it now and you don't like it. For whatever reason, when you found it, you liked something in that image and you saved it. Keep it in there. Because depending on your mood and everything else, depending on other ideas that you've got brewing around, yeah, that picture may not connect with you this time, but it will later. I will admit that usually once a year, I tend to do it towards the end of the year, like in December. December is kind of a big cleanup and organization time for me. I don't do the spring cleaning thing. Like I do an end of the year kind of cleanup with my filing, all that kind of stuff. I will try to make it a point and I'll go through my idea folders and I will get rid of stuff that maybe I already did a piece of that idea, or it's like, yeah, you know what? This picture keeps popping up and I honestly just have no idea. And like, I'm to the point where I hate it because I can't see anything in it that I would like. Fine. And then it goes and I trim it down. I don't empty it, but the folders, but I trim it down. Same with the notes. So the key is to this, you set aside a little bit of time. All right. And by the way, this can be useful for pretty much any genre of photography. I don't care if you shoot landscapes. Okay. You could be saving ideas that, maybe you find out about ICM, in camera motion, and you say, ooh, I'd like to try that. So you're looking at images that have in camera motion and you're looking for different techniques, different movements that the photographers have used. and you want to go out and experiment with them in different locations and things like that. So again, it applies for all genres. There's opportunities in all genres. Okay. All right. So that is your DIY tip for the week. Also, just a reminder, all of you are part of a growing global community of photographers in over 100 countries who tune in to watch The Last Frame every week. It'd help a lot more people find out about The Last Frame if you could do me a solid, hit the thumbs up below the video. The more thumbs up, the more YouTube recommends the show to other photographers. Okay, so I did promise you that I would share my teaching schedule really quick. I've got some cool stuff coming up. Let me just, there we go, the browser here. Whoops, and I need to reload that page really quick. I'm sorry, there we go. So I mentioned Friday. If you're in or near Fredericksburg, Virginia this Friday, I'm going to be doing a full day workshop, and it's only, I think, $125, $150 if you're not a member. You don't have to be a member of VPPA. It's from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Portrait photography, create the difference, make it fun, market it, and sell it. So it's A to Z, the entire process. August 29th, I've got another virtual presentation, which any of you that are in business or thinking about going into business, I would really encourage you to sign up for this presentation. It's called Competition is a Choice. Be forewarned, it's kind of a kick in the butt, right? Drives me nuts how often I hear photographers talking about competition. And when I say photographers talking about competition, I'm really talking about photographers whining about competition and complaining about competition. And it's their own doggone fault. I've never had competition. I don't have competition now. I choose not to have competition. And it is glorious. And there's no reason that you can't do the same thing. So August 29th, it's being presented by Daisie, or for Daisie. You do have to sign up for the Daisie app, which there's a paid section. You don't have to pay. You can go ahead and set up a free trial and you can attend. And even if you can't make it live, then you'll be able to watch it on the replay. So go ahead and use that link, sign up for it. It's at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon here in eastern part of the US, 8 p.m. in the evening in the UK where Daisie is based. But if you sign up, you'll be able to watch it on the replay. And then I've had a bunch of people asking about this one, September 12th. So this is a presentation that I'm doing, creative portraits with colored gels. All right, so if you're interested, make sure you sign up for this one. And gosh, there's an issue there that I have to fix. You can't sign up right now, but I'll fix that. So it's a 2-hour interactive program live. Again, kind of soup to nuts, all about using colored gels. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and let's hit our shoot breakdown. Okay. So we're going to do the cover image that I have on tonight's last frame. And let me go ahead and bring that up on the screen here for you. So there's the image. This is an image that I shot at a pre-con workshop, Imaging USA. Actually, was it? I guess it was 2022, probably the one that happened during the pandemic in Washington D.C. So, part of what I really enjoy about showing off this image and talking about this image is it's actually a pretty simple image in terms of the lighting and the setup. The feathered collar that you see the model wearing, you can buy these on Amazon for literally like between $15 and $40, right? So it depends on how fancy you want to get. I will tell you, I cheat a little bit. I buy kind of the middle to cheap ones, and then I will clone and replicate parts of it to fill them out a little bit more, okay? And it's actually really easy. It's not super advanced Photoshop work, but you can get super fancy ones, and they're pretty cool. So for this particular shot, I told the folks that were there in attendance we were going to do something that had kind of like a little bit of a Game of Thrones vibe, loosely based, because I wasn't into the Game of Thrones, so I never actually watched the show. But let's face it, you kind of have to be under a rock if you don't know what it is, right? So I had actually found a textured background that actually had a similar texture to the big fancy throne that's in the Game of Thrones, but I didn't want it to be like too obvious. I wanted to kind of hint at that. So the way that I did this shot, let me switch over here, and there we go. It's basically two lights and a gray background. That's it. So the key light that you're seeing here, it was done with an umbrella. The lighting was a Godox 8200. Is off to camera right, and it was a little, in fact, let me just go to a top-down view. It was a little further to camera right than what I would normally do if I was shooting a portrait. Let me just unlock that. If I was shooting a regular portrait, I would tend to kind of come into here with it so that I've got a little more light and a little less shaded area on the face. But since I wanted it to be a little bit more dramatic, I had it off to one side here. And then let me just go ahead and grab a... We'll switch this over to a Godox 8200. A lot of you have been asking about how the software works. So I thought, well, you know what? I'll go ahead and I'll put this one together while we are live here. So we're going to spin that around, aim it at the background, but we're going to put a red gel on it. Okay. And then kind of turn it way down. So this is about where I was in camera with that shot. And again, I've set up my 10-foot circle that you hear me talk about a lot. It doesn't mean that you have to do the picture in a 10-foot circle, right? I'm not telling anybody that you have to shoot your portraits in a 10-foot circle, but I want you to understand that a lot of this cool stuff doesn't take a ton of space. In case you've never seen me talk about the 10-foot circle before, what's also nice about the 10-foot circle, you want to watch the picture up above me, okay? As I move this light around the 10-foot circle, no matter where I move it around the 10-foot circle, the exposure stays correct, right? So once I figured out my exposure, I can work around that 10-foot circle, and the exposure is going to be exactly where it should be. That's the 10-foot circle concept, okay? But again, basically what we have for this shot, let me kind of get back to where we're going. Yeah, we're kind of like right in there, all right? And then a background light with the red gel, and then the texture dropped over top. Fairly simple shot to do, right? I will make it a point when I update the chapters for the show later tonight. I will include a link to an Amazon page where you can find all of the feathered collars. There's tons of them, all kinds of different colors. In fact, for the program that I'm doing this Friday, I've got a feathered piece, very different than the Game of Thrones kind of look, but it's actually got a lot of red in the feathered piece. So I decided, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and play with some color that they have in that. So there's all kinds of stuff that you can get into there. Okay. All right. Let me just slide that out of the way. Oh, actually, you know what? While I have that open, we're going to dig into our Q&A here, and I'm going to go back early on. I had somebody asked a question. Let me just get it up on the screen here about last week's. And this was James in Alaska. He's asking, how would you approach that shot that I did last week? And I'll bring the lighting diagram up. How would you approach it with speed lights or an LED light? He shoots an Olympus camera. He has an 8200 and a GVM 80. So for those of you that don't remember, here, let me grab last week's shot. This is the picture from last week, okay, that was the shoot breakdown. And give me just a moment here, and I'll go ahead and I'll open up last week's file. Maybe I'll open up Naslie's file. Bear with me here, guys. Sorry. My goodness. All right, there it is. Okay. So this one was kind of a unique one, and there we go. Let me just switch over here. Okay. So now, since I'm doing this one kind of spur of the moment, for this particular shot, you have to ignore the preview up here. It's going to look like crap. But I promise you, what I'm showing you is the setup, and it absolutely works. Okay. So here, let's just get that to where we can see it. Basically, I'm using my box bed. If you're not sure what that is, go back to last week. You'll be able to see it. You could use a V-flat. You could use a piece of plywood. You could use almost anything. So James in Alaska, you would basically do it the same way. I would encourage you, if you've got an AD200, use the AD200, right? This is with one light. So, and by the way, I use an AD200, right? You could do it with the GVM80. The problem is the GVM80 isn't nearly as bright. So one will have to work in a fairly dark space if you don't want the ambient light to impact what you're doing, working with the GVM. Two, you're also going to have to crank your ISO considerably to be able to make that work. Okay. So I would encourage you use the AD200 and you should be absolutely fine. Okay. All right, let's see what else we had here. There were a couple of things. Gang, now's the time. If you have questions, start typing. You're here. How can I help you? Okay. Especially some of you that are in my Tog Knowledge community. Like, we need to get people actually really working on making changes to their photography. I don't know that I managed to effectively communicate the idea that, yeah, I've been shooting for a really long time and I know what I'm doing and I know what I'm talking about. Big deal. I still approach photography every day, every week as an opportunity to learn, to continue to grow, to continue to improve. I'm sorry to tell you, if you think that this is something where you're going to get to a point where you know what you're doing and you know all of it, that's possible. Let me be clear, that's possible. But at that point, your work will basically flatline. It plateaus. And it's not going to change. It's not going to improve. I don't know about you, but I find that boring. I simply do. So for me, it's always about where can I push myself? How can I change? How can I add something new, etc. So I encourage you, put in the effort. It's worth it. The rewards are worth it because you're learning and you're having fun learning and you're creating new things, cool things, things that are different than what you've done before, right? Okay, so let's see. Joe Dussel had a question here. Let me scroll down and get that. Joe, do you have any recommendations for slideshow video apps? Well, I do, and there's a lot of them out there, Joe. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is Google and see what you can find. But one that I can talk to you about that I got actual experience with, and I have not used it in probably about 5 years. So I can tell you that they have added a lot to it in the time period since I used it. But it's a company called Animoto. I'll drop their URL in the chat here. I don't make any money from them. I'm not affiliated with them. I no longer have an account with them only because I don't have a need for the software. I do my own video editing at this point. So if I needed a slideshow, I would make my own. Not saying you need to, but what was particularly cool about Animoto is that you could have a series of images and you could upload them to Animoto and pick a piece of music that you like, and they basically were way ahead of the curve. They kind of had like an AI that would create a slideshow with your photos and even some video clips and match it to the music. And it was pretty cool. If you go way back on my YouTube channel, way back, you'll find some very early videos that are nothing more than video slideshows. They're like behind the scenes of a shoot or a test shoot or that kind of stuff. There's none of me talking to that. It's literally just music playing in the pictures. those were done with Animoto, and they're really nice. They're really, really well done. So certainly, depending on what your needs are, etc., I would encourage you, give this a try. They do have a free version that you can start out with, but like most of these platforms, you're going to pay for the services. Basically, if you want something really good for free, you're going to do your own video editing, and you're going to go that route. But obviously, there's a learning curve there. Okay. All right, Joe. So let's see here. What else did I sign? I just had something from Nick. Nick says, Joe, I use Bridge, ACR, and Photoshop. Have you noticed content-aware removal in ACR is useless? I frequently need to go to Photoshop just to use the remove tool like Magic to remove branches and the like. Nick, I can't say that I've noticed it. I do play around with those tools a lot, but I actually, and again, this is just my workflow. I don't do any of that kind of stuff in Adobe Camera Raw. Especially in the last year, you guys have heard me talking about the fact with like the background and people masking tools and that type of stuff. I've developed a lot more respect for what I can do in Adobe Camera, especially when it comes to like all the baseball pictures of my grandson that I've shown and showed you how I work those. But for me, the AI stuff, I'm using it a lot. I like its potential. I'm building it into my workflow, but I do all of it once I'm into Photoshop. I mean, certainly that could change. You just kind of reassured me, like, yeah, don't go mess with ACR for a while. But for me, I would rather work it in Photoshop. I do imagine that we'll see more and more of those tools show up in Adobe Camera Raw, because that's the only way for Adobe to get them into Lightroom. And photographers are not going to be happy ultimately if all of those tools are only available in Photoshop, because the majority of photographers primarily use Lightroom, right? If they're Adobe people. So I do think that you'll see that kind of working its way in. It's also worth mentioning, Luminar Neo, which I just mentioned. They're basically building all of these AI tools in as part of the raw processing tools. So they're kind of a little bit of even though they were kind of a couple months behind Adobe releasing some of these AI generative tools, they're actually kind of ahead of Adobe in terms of integrating it into the raw processors and that. So, and again, it's not a race. It's literally a different way of going about it. But I've talked about it before with all the different programs that are out there for developing between Adobe, Luminar. Of course, you've got Affinity, you've got DxO. There's Capture One for raw processing, even GIMP, right? As far as I'm concerned, it's a two-company race as far as I'm concerned, and that's Adobe and Luminar. And what's really neat about that race is they both take a very different approach to get to the end. But in terms of the quality of their product, and not just the quality, but the capabilities, as far as I'm concerned, they're the only two players. Yes, Affinity, DxO, they have a lot of good features in them. I just don't like the interface. I find them clunky to use. So for me, I'm out. But obviously, they do have a customer base that loves them. Okay. What I would encourage you to do, Nick, is spend a few minutes in the the Adobe community, their online community. They have a very vibrant and busy user community. And if there is a problem, like actually a problem with the tools being extremely slow or not working well, I guarantee you there are people talking about it in the Adobe community. Even myself, actually, just last night, I ran into a problem where all of a sudden Bridge wasn't recognizing any of my sidecar files. So I had all these files that I'd processed, and Bridge was showing none of the processing. And if I opened the file in Adobe Camera Raw and then saved it, it was overwriting the sidecar file that I had already processed. That's not cool, right? So I was able to go to the Adobe community, and it took me all of like 30 seconds to find out for some reason there was a bug in the last Camera Raw update that was causing that on some people's machines, not across the board. So it was simply just a matter of go back one generation on the Adobe Camera Raw plugin. All my sidecar files were back. And then interestingly enough, today, Adobe pushed a bug fix on that, and it's good to go. So their user community is awesome, and it's a piece of software where there's so many people using it. If there's a problem, it's very unlikely you're the only person that's got it, so there will be people talking about it. For me, I find that very, very helpful, because then I do know it's like, all right, is this something stupid that I'm doing and I need to look better at like the directions, or no, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing and other people are having the exact same problem? So that's kind of one of those few times where, there's definitely safety in numbers, right? All right, let's see what else do we got here from Jeff. Jeff says, love the DIY tip. I've done a version of this and it's hard to make it into a habit. I need to try harder. Yeah, I mean, you're right, Jeff. That's kind of one of those things with all this photography stuff. It's like saying, oh, you got to practice more, right? It's a matter of building it into a habit. The more, that we practice, the better. I know I'm going to get the quote wrong. I was scrolling through TikTok at lunch today, and I came across a clip from Michael Phelps, the Olympic gold medalist swimmer, and very similar to some quotes that Kobe Bryant has been credited with. But he talked about, elite athletes and people that are at the top of their game. And he said, a big part of the reason why they're there and a big part of the reason why they've been successful is they never turned away from the hard stuff, right? Whatever the hard stuff was, they did the hard stuff. And then he goes on to talk about, practicing every day, getting up at ridiculous hours of the morning, going to the pool and swimming. It's like, you get to that point, because you do the hard stuff. Kobe Bryant talked about the idea that, so many kids think they're going to spend an hour to an hour and a half a week shooting hoops, playing basketball, and they wonder why they don't get better. Whereas there are kids that are spending 3 to 4 hours a day, right? And they're the kids that are getting better. So by no means am I saying, hey, you want to get good at photography, you got to do 3 to 4 hours a day. But it is kind of one of those things. The more that we look at these things as habits, and the more that we're realistic about where it fits into our lives and where we're able, to do these things. And understand too, gang, one of the lessons I've learned about the habit thing is, at least for me, I don't know about you folks, but life is like constantly evolving, right? And I don't mean in bad ways, but I mean like, right about the time where I feel like I've got it under control, something kind of changes and there's a new set of challenges, right? Or there's a new piece to the daily routine that's disrupted some other things. That's normal. That's a part of the process. So for a lot of folks, a lot of you folks, one of the first habits that you need to get into actually has nothing to do with photography, and it's a life habit. And that is, every so often, you have to kind of like reevaluate the priorities and reprioritize some things. It's not because you want to do it, it's because you have to do it, right? You got to be realistic. So there's only so many hours in a day. There's only so many things that we can get done in a week. And along the way, with this practice, with the reevaluating, with the building the habits and all that kind of stuff, for those times where you don't feel like doing the work, going back to the Michael Phelps reference, you really have to listen close when you're having those moods. It's okay to have a day where you just don't feel like doing something and you blow it off. I'm guilty of that, right? But if you find yourself more often than not blowing it off, that's also your brain, your emotions telling you something about the task, right? And there's a balance point there, right? Because in the case of somebody like a Michael Phelps or a Kobe Bryant, their passion for their game, their task was strong enough that they were able to do the hard stuff even when they didn't want to. If you're not able to do the hard stuff, then maybe you're actually not as passionate about it as you think. And that's okay. You can be not passionate about photography, but then you need to be realistic about what your capabilities will be photographically. So that's a matter of going back to your why. Why did you get this big, expensive camera? What made you fall in love with photography? And are you really maybe pushing yourself for something that actually has nothing to do with your why? Right? That's part of that social media trap. Because indeed, look, you go on social media for 5 minutes, you see hundreds, thousands of amazing images. Over the course of a week or a month, that adds up to millions of amazing images. But did you actually start out saying to yourself, I want to make amazing images? Or was there another motive? And it's okay if there was, right? That's the cool part. But don't torture yourself. Life's too short for the torture. So that's the thing. It's, you know, the constant evaluation as life goes on, it's a part of the process. And don't guilt yourself into thinking, oh, I suck because I've decided I'm not really that interested in this. I'm going more in this direction. You've all heard me talk about my career, right? My career has been one of, yeah, I'm getting bored. I'm not having fun with this. Something new pops up and a passion develops, and that's where I go. And, you know, we want to talk about a year or 2 or 3 years from now. I still don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up. I have no idea. But the one thing I can tell you for sure, it's going to evolve photography, right? But could it be something completely different? Could I maybe not be teaching anymore? Could I be, hard to imagine, but could I be getting up at 3 a.m. in the morning and going out and shooting landscapes at sunrise? It's possible. Who knows, right? But whatever it is, there will be a camera involved. That's for sure. Okay. Let's see. Chibuzo, where are we at here? Any tips on how to make impactful portraits of a client? I find most of my portraits are boring. It always feels like it's missing something. Well, gosh, Chibuzo, I could talk about, for about 3 hours on that. But since I know you, Chibuzo happens to be a member of my Tog Knowledge community. The link is in the description below. You can get a 7-day free trial. I'm not going to give you a hard sell. Chibuzo is in Africa and does some incredible fashion photography. And a lot of you, myself included, should be ashamed sometimes because not only does he do this incredible fashion photography, but he does it with really minimal gear. Okay. So now that's enough for the compliments, Chibuzo. Let me get to your statement here. The reason why I wanted to share that with people, though, is it kind of frames part of what I want to tell you in terms of the idea of how do I make impactful portraits, and you find that most of your portraits are boring. It always feels like something's missing. So follow me because I'm going to take a little bit of a long way around. Kind of have to if I'm going to give you an answer that's useful, because you need to go back and look at these boring portraits that you've taken, and you need to, pun intended, look at them through a different lens. So when we talk about the concept of a portrait, folks, right? Portraits tend to be somewhat utilitarian. They serve a purpose. A portrait for a resume or for LinkedIn to try and get a job. A portrait for a dating app, right? A portrait that's going to go on a company website. A portrait that is intended to be kind of very traditional, and it's going to be printed really big, and it's going to be framed in a very ornate frame, and it's going to be hung above the fireplace in this big room. Okay, every one of those portraits serves a purpose. Every one of those portraits should have a very different look and feel to it. So before we can even talk about being creative in any way, shape, or form, and doing the kinds of things that would excite us as photographers, we need to talk about what purpose is that portrait serving, and that kind of dictates how you're going to photograph it. So Chibuzo, having seen your work and knowing that you enjoy fashion, I have no doubt that anytime you have to photograph a realtor or somebody for a business portrait that's going to go on LinkedIn, that is going to be a very boring task for you, because There's nothing creative about it. And if you're making it creative, you're actually failing. You're failing because that kind of a portrait is not about how good a photographer you are. If people look at that picture and say, oh my God, that's the most amazing photographer ever, that picture failed because it's not about you, it's about the subject, right? So the way that I look at it, there are a couple categories where as photographers, we do have the opportunity to make portraits that are very impactful. And actually, that's a word that I really like. Those are portraits similar to what I do, fashion portraits and beauty portraits, creative portraits. The impact comes in a sense of boldness, but at the same time, with my work, I always strive to have a connection. I want people to feel like they're making a connection with that subject. That's why I do a lot of images where people are looking straight at the camera. Environmental portraits. Environmental portraits become impactful when they do tell a story, right? And the cool part is of an environmental portrait can be somewhat creative. Still can't be about the photographer, but you can get a little bit creative with it, but it's really about the subject, okay? Portraits that are being done for hanging on the wall above the mantle in the fireplace, right? Depending on the client and depending on the client's taste, those are portraits that could be less traditional and more creative and impactful. But here's the thing. If you are truly providing a service as a photographer, when you're hired to make that big portrait that's going to be framed ornately and hung on the wall, before you schedule your shoot, before you take a single picture, you should be coordinating with the client, and you need to understand what are the colors of the decor in the room? What is the color of the wall or the wallpaper that that image will hang on? What color frame do they intend to put it in? Otherwise, you run the risk of going off and creating an image. It's a really cool image, really strong, but it clashes with the room and the way that they intend to display it, right? So go back where I started with those types of portraits, you still have some extra guidelines that you have to follow. But now let me add one more piece to all of this. Regardless of the genre. So even if it is a dating image, for a dating app, even if it is for a business website, okay? In my opinion, where you make a portrait most impactful is the connection, right? It is making sure that when somebody other than you and the subject, because you don't count, and actually the subject doesn't count, so someone other than the subject, when they look at it, they are drawn to that person. So everything about the image should be done in a way, so we're talking the lighting, the composition, any props, outfits, everything should be done in a way to bring people to that person and basically hold them by the ears and not let them look away. That's the goal, right? That's impactful. That's a very strong picture. So I'm not making an accusation, but I know I've struggled with this at times in my career. When I say yes to jobs, doing things that I don't really enjoy doing, I tend to do much less than my best work. It's not that I try. It's not that I show up and say, I don't give a damn, whatever. No. I'm a big believer, once I press the button, I can't make any excuses, right? It's going to have my name on it. I'm going to do my darndest. But it's harder. If it's something that I don't really enjoy doing, it's harder. That, again, is also part of the reason why I have worked in various different genres and categories throughout my life, because I simply would burn out on something. When I did commercial advertising photography, I loved it. I had a blast. When I did food, that was so cool, and mainly because I was learning every step of the way, including learning how to shoot large format. But ultimately, that wasn't what I really enjoy, so it burned out really quick. That's why I only shot food for about 3 years. But I had the good fortune of being able to shoot national ad campaigns while I was shooting food, and it was a blast working with a food stylist, learning how to use a 4x5 camera, learning that I don't want to use a 4x5 camera. Okay, so um, so that for me is a big part of it. And so one of the things you need to ask yourself, Chibuzo, as you go back around, and this is not for you. You don't have to admit this to me or to anybody else. You gotta admit it to yourself. You have to go back and look at these images that you're calling boring, and you have to ask yourself, why are they boring, right? They may be boring. Here's where I'm going to try and let you off the hook a little. They may be boring because their purpose, their utilitarian purpose, is kind of boring. That's a possibility. In which case, you actually did a great job, right? Or they may be boring because you're just not into that kind of portrait and that kind of portraiture. So you had a hard time connecting with the idea, the concept, as well as connecting with the subject, etc. So the last piece on that, boy, it's going to take me right up to the end here. So the last piece on that is also when you're looking for impact in portraiture, it is important to establish relationships, build relationships with your subjects. When I say relationships, obviously I don't mean like dating or romantic or intimate, but I do mean, don't set up sessions where it's like, hi, how are you? Cool, let's shoot, sit right there, here we go. That's not building a relationship. Get to know your subjects a little bit. Be personable, be talkative, ask lots of questions. Understand, there's an old phrase, knowledge is power, right? When it comes to talking about people and knowing people, that's very true. And unfortunately, it's frequently used in a negative way where people abuse that. I'm not talking about abusing at all. I'm just talking about the power comes from the fact that the more you talk to people and the more you get to know them, the real power is not what you know about them. You will learn things that will help you not say things that might upset them or will help you know what to talk about because they will enjoy talking about it. Sure, you will gain that kind of knowledge. But more importantly, what you're going to gain is you're going to gain their trust. You're going to gain their confidence. You're going to gain the fact that they will be less nervous and more relaxed. That's what you gain. And I've said this many times before, but even a person who is an introvert, if you have to photograph an introvert who is ultimately very shy and not very talkative, I can get an introvert to talk my ear off simply by asking them questions and being sincere and by listening to the responses. Because introverts, often more than non-introverted people, actually love to talk about themselves, but the person that they're talking to has to really be interested. So it kind of comes down to an empathy thing in that regard. So when you look back through your work, if this lack of impact is due to not having a connection with the subject, that's a matter of spending more time talking, getting to know them, showing more empathy, right? Really putting them at ease and bringing them into the shot as a collaborator. I also make sure when I'm working, with somebody doing a portrait, I kind of have verbal diarrhea. Like I don't stop talking. I explain all the things I'm doing. I talk about what I'm doing. I ask them questions, just nonstop. And that's part of my responsibility, is to keep the conversation going nonstop. Even though I'd rather just be able to pay attention to my gear and get things set up and go, no, I'm gonna talk nonstop and build that relationship. So that's where I would start. A little bit of self-evaluation, and then of course, from there, certainly take the steps to, start making some tweaks and some changes to your workflow. And you definitely have the talent, Chibuzo. It's just a matter of maybe taking a slightly different approach. Okay? All right, gang. So we're out of time. Thank all of you for watching. I hope you found some value with what I shared tonight. I also hope that I get to see some of you in Virginia on Friday and next week for Daisie for a competition as a choice. If you still need to do so, hitting a thumbs up, remember, helps more photographers find out about the show. And look, remember, you don't get back the days that you waste. So please, pick up that camera and shoot something. Because your best shot, it's your next shot. Adios, gang. Take care.